Welcome everybody to Method Unstoppable. If you're new here, my name is Clark Masterson and I'm a high performance coach for leaders. I help leaders who are looking to level up their people skills and their performance, and I help people who are looking to level up their leadership skills. Now, I study human performance and leadership, and I like to share what I learn, both in my coaching practice and through the books and content that I'm learning about to help you perform better. Now, today we're talking about self-regulation. Now, one of the biggest reasons why people fail at achieving what they want is because of a lack of self-regulation, a lack of self-control. Everything that we feel that gets us off track, it might be a distraction, it might be fear, it might be an overreaction or an outburst or a lack of ability to stay the course. Those are all a result of dysregulation. If we can better regulate our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, we can stay on track to crush it and to do what we want. Now, let me take a brief tangent here. You may have heard a saying that we teach what we most need to learn. And even with other people that you follow who or listen to who are teaching things or talking about things, I guarantee it that they got into that space because they were interested in helping themselves. They needed to learn about a topic, so they learned about it. Turns out they love it, and then they want to teach it. So I'm well within this bucket. I've had challenges with fitness and with personal leadership and being a leader at work in the past, and so I learned about those things, and I learned to level up my own performance, and now I love helping other people do the same thing. Now, this concept, though, of self-regulation hits home for me because, there's a couple of reasons here. One, I'm an emotional person. I've got strong feelings. Now, that's very human of me, and I know that's human of you because we are emotional animals first and then rational. And you'll hear me say that a couple of times. Self-regulation is something that I have had to practice myself because every time I yell or I react or I get distracted or I go off track of something, that I wanted to do towards a goal because of some, emotional need or reaction, it kicks me off course. And I can't stand it because, at the end of that time of going off track, I look back just with regret. So this is an area that I am interested in order to improve my performance. And I want to share with you what I have learned that works for me. And hopefully it can work for you too. The topic of self-regulation is actually well rooted and planted in human performance, especially as leaders. If you're a leader of yourself or a leader of teams, self-regulation is crucial to performance. Now, a dysregulated individual is a slave to their emotions. A dysregulated individual is a slave to their emotions. Now remember, emotions, they're called feelings, not thinkings. The purpose of an emotion is to get us to act without rational thought. It also helps anchor memories and do other things. But just consider, you can feel something and be moved to action without having to make a conscious decision. Now, why this is risky is because we're humans and we're emotional first. When we get into a situation and we want to make a change, we want to perform better, we want to do something different, inevitably, we run into a challenge or we run into uncertainty. We must change. That triggers an emotional response, which then triggers action without rational thought, which eventually can lead us away from the goals that we want to achieve. At least that's what's happened, to me in the past. And I think it's happened with, everybody that I've ever worked with as well and everybody that I've coached with. If we can control ourselves and regulate ourselves, we can lead to higher performance. Let's talk about definitions. So self-regulation is the ability to manage your thoughts, feelings, and actions in a way that aligns with your goals, right? It is a way for you to think and act with intention in spite of how you feel, regardless of how you feel. This assumes something as well, because part of the definition that I'm using for self-regulation, for self-control, is that you have a goal or you have an aligned vision of where you want to go. If you don't have any goals, there's no reason to self-regulate. If there's no purpose behind acting a certain way, then you can act however you want, because no purpose is going to be fulfilled or unfulfilled. If there's no desired outcome, then there's no aligned action. And so any action is appropriate. Again, when we have goals, we have to change. In order to achieve something new, we have to do new things. That requires us to be different. And change can be hard because it brings along emotions that can block our growth. Now, these emotions may include, but are definitely not limited to, fear, disappointment, and anger. Now, why does this happen? Our minds tend to see change as a threat. Change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is risky. Certainty feels safe. Uncertainty is dangerous because we don't know what threats may exist in that uncertain realm or road in which we're traveling. Now, risk, uncertainty can trigger fear. It can trigger a stress response in our brains and can motivate us to act without thinking in order to avoid that uncertain path. Our emotions kick in and keep us in our comfort zone. Change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty leads to fear, but it can also trigger other emotions like anger. Now, if we feel fear, for example, and we perceive a physical threat or we recognize some kind of threat, our body can motivate us to act through anger. Anger makes us feel strong, in control, indignant. Keep myself safe, rah, rah, rah. I'm going to crush it. I feel threatened. Therefore, watch how big and tough I am. I've definitely been guilty of this. And every time if I'm guilty of raising my voice in an argument or in a discussion, my wife will call me out on that as well. And so I appreciate that after the fact, of course. But when we feel threatened internally, we can react with fear or we can react with anger. When fear or anger is present, our stress response is fired up. We are motivated to take action without thinking. The stress response, fight or flight or freeze, drives us to act. Now, while some stress is good for performance, a flood of stress and pressure is not good for performance. And also, again, the risk is that we take an action misaligned with what we intend. Now, a self-regulated human can pause, acknowledge those feelings, and choose an action that is aligned with their ideal outcome, instead of reacting without that rational thought, potentially off course. For a self-regulated human, and for a version of you, a version of me, which is self-regulated, we can acknowledge our feelings as signals, as input, but they are not truth. They are not fact. They just are a perspective. They're a natural reaction that our bodies and brains have. We can acknowledge that, and then we can choose our action moving forward. So, for example, like cravings when you're hungry, they are no longer a feeling that you must eat. They're just a signal that you're low on energy, or you're uncomfortable, or you might need some stress relief. But hunger is not necessarily or the sensation. Hunger is not quite the right word, because sometimes you have a craving, and you're not hungry at all. You feel uncomfortable. You have a craving to fix that. So acknowledging the craving might mean, okay, I'm hungry. I could choose to eat. Or I'm stressed. Okay, I need to de-stress. Or I need some soothing, and I need something other than food to soothe that pain that I'm feeling. Let's not forget about positive emotions too. When we feel ecstatic and super pumped, our judgment skills are actually inhibited, because we tend to think that everything is possible. When you are feeling on top of the world, judgment is blunted. So winning a big competition does not mean that you absolutely should go out and party hard to celebrate, right? Getting a big promotion does not mean you should go build that pool in your backyard because you're going to have endless funds from here on out. Again, negative emotions can trigger a response that can take us off path towards our aligned outcome, but also positive emotions can also inhibit our judgment, so we got to be careful of those as well. Now, let's jump into how we actually build self-regulation. Now, to be effective, we need to assess 3 facets of self-regulation. The first one is cognitive, the second one is emotional, and then the third one is behavioral. Now, they're not hierarchical, but let's talk about them in order of cognitive, emotional, behavioral, because they do link a little bit. So let's jump in. So cognitive regulation. Have you ever tried controlling your thinking? Now, like something that I believe in is we can control our thoughts when we're intentional about them. But if you're like sitting around going through your day to day, what kind of thoughts come up in your mind and can you control them? It's very difficult because our mind is a idea generating machine. Like try meditating and thinking of nothing. You could probably do this for like 10 seconds, 15, 30 seconds maybe, but inevitably at some point, your mind will start thinking. It will start creating thoughts because that's what the mind does. That's what the brain does. Now, although the mind is or an idea or content creating machine, we can quiet the mind through focus, through focusing on something like our breathing. But again, that chatter, that monkey mind never really goes away. You can make it quieter, through practice, but it's always there. This is one reason why focus is such a challenge, because we're focusing on one thing and our mind is constantly chattering and coming up with random things and ideas. But it's also scanning the background for threats. It's also looking for opportunities, whether we're aware of it or not. The mind is always moving. Now, with all that background noise going on and that idea generation going on, how can we regulate our minds? Well, we can do so by stepping out of unconscious awareness and into conscious awareness. Now, this is an idea that I talk about all the time as well. But the best way to step out from unconscious awareness, from just operating in a natural reactive unconscious state, is to simply be intentional. Set an intention. Being intentional is such an overlooked, underappreciated performance enhancer. When we operate without intention, we are behaving in a habitual and reactive, unconscious manner. So one example that oftentimes people use when you're in the unconscious is you drive home. Let's say you're going from work to home or the store to home, and all of a sudden you're like almost home and you think back like, oh my gosh, I don't even remember driving most of the way. It's because you've got the habit of the driving down. Your mind can think about something else and unconsciously take action on your behalf. Now, if you want better focus and positivity and better mental energy, then setting an intention is a practice that can take us out from that unconscious, habitual reactivity and into conscious awareness. Now, here's how I like to do it. First, I like to set a morning intention. Now, each morning, I take a moment and I pause and I consider and I write down the 3 most important things that I need to do in that day. And I get specific. It might be, I need to reach out to 10 people. I need to coach 3 clients. I need to exercise for 45 minutes. I need to build a book summary. I need to create a video, yada, yada, yada. You get it. Now, each day may have a different top 3, but it doesn't matter. It is the routine of sitting down and being like, okay, I'm going to set an intention. I'm going to do these certain things. Now, notice my list is not 20 things long. Well, of course, the list is actually endless. There's an endless number of things that we could be doing, but there are only 3 that I must get done each day if I'm going to move the needle on anything towards my goals. So I set the intention every morning. By just paying attention to these in the morning and being intentional, it's like I'm planting a seed of what I want to do. And then all I have to do is let my mind water that seed throughout the day, and I'll take action on them in the morning. But that intention is enough to keep my mind on them through the day until I get them done. Morning intention is great, but inevitably, like I'm going to go do something. I'm going to go work out, and then I'm going to transition to work stuff, and then I got to jump on a call, and then I have to build content, and then I have to read a book, and then it's family time and dinner time. During each of these transitions, there's an opportunity to set a transitional intention. Now, I actually learned this from Brendon Burchard in his book, High Performance Habits. And here's what Brendon Burchard recommends. While we are transitioning from one role or task or scenario to the next, set an intention for how you want to show up. Now, oftentimes what happens is that we go right from like a work meeting to home time to dinner time to kid time to more work time and blah, blah. And our roles bleed into each other. So if I were to jump right off of a work call and then have to go right into coaching, my kids' team doing softball, how effective am I going to be at coaching and be able to turn off the work side? You may notice that if you jump right from one task to the next, we never really turn off that past task. And so thoughts of that task bleed into the current task that we're trying to get done. And it makes us distracted. How can we think about, connecting with our kids or our spouse or our team at work, or even with ourselves if we're doing personal work, if we are distracted by thinking about the previous thing that we should have done? So anyways, Brendon Burchard recommends when you're transitioning from one event to the next, take a moment, breathe deeply, and tell yourself, release. And what you're doing here is saying, okay, I'm going to release all the things and thoughts that I was doing in this previous task. I'm putting those things aside. Do that a few times, do that for a minute, and then set an intention for how you want to show up in the next situation. Do you want to show up as patient? Do you want to be energetic? Do you want to be a good listener? Do you want to be focused? Do you want to be fun? Whatever it is, set the intention. Now, the third type of intention to set is positive intention. Our brains are very good at defaulting to negative thoughts because we're always looking for things that are going to kill us or potentially harm us. So thoughts of fear and worry and pain, they're helpful for getting us to avoid risk, but they don't help us recognize opportunity. They don't help us connect. And those negative, feelings don't help us inspire either ourselves or others. We need positivity for that. So to create positive intention, I actually leverage the transitional intention and I add in a thought about positivity. So for example, if I'm stressed about a decision, before moving and making a decision, I might ask myself something positive like, okay, what's the opportunity here? Can I turn off that inner critic chatter in my mind, that fear voice, that negativity, and intentionally switch to the positive voice and be like, okay, where's the opportunity here? How will I grow from this? Both of these questions will put my mind in that positive frame. Now, Sean Achor comments on this in his book, The Happiness Advantage. He says it multiple times, and in his TED Talk, a positive brain outperforms a negative or neutral brain. So that's cognitive regulation. How do we control our thoughts more often? Well, the thing that works best for me is intention. And we can set intention, or at least I set intention in the morning, in transitions, and then with a positive spin. So next, let's talk about emotional regulation. Emotions are going to happen whether we want them to happen or not, because again, we are emotional animals first. If you've ever read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, he talks about this, about how we are emotional animals and then we are rational. He equates it to this emotional elephant, and then our rational mind is like this rider on top of the elephant. And so, just think about that. Our rational mind is this little thing that has a bunch of control, and we're trying to control this elephant. Also, if you're interested in learning more about this, Daniel Kahneman writes about this in his book, fantastic book, everyone should have, Thinking Fast or Slow. Now, there's two ways that we can regulate emotional reactions, at least two ways that work for me. One is creating space. Now, if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl, the guy who invented logotherapy, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He made this comment that between the time when something happens to us in our action or in our reaction to it, there is space in between where we get to choose what our action is. Most of the time, something happens and we react and there is zero space. Because something happens and we make a perception, we have an assessment, and then our emotions flare up. And then without thinking, we are driven to action. No space. If we want to regulate our emotions, it's not really regulating whether or not they're on or off. It's regulating what we do about them. And so what we have to do, what works, is create space between when something happens and when you choose to act. Because remember, our feelings and our actions, they're two separate things. You can feel triggered and angry and still be calm and respectful. Now, this is really difficult to do, and it takes practice. So the next time you feel triggered, pause and label that emotion. If you feel angry, take a step back, pause and say, okay, what am I feeling? I'm feeling angry. Even just that step right there forces us to pull ourselves out of that emotional movie that we're playing in our heads where we are the main character. And there's there's disaster all around. It forces us to step out of character and think rationally for a moment. Now that is a jarring moment. And now it can still be difficult because emotions are super powerful. And again, they move us to action without thoughts. So just practice this. The next time you feel fired up or emotionally triggered, pause, label it, think rationally, and then choose how you want to respond. Okay, there's one other method that you can use to better regulate your emotions. And it's something I call the emotional frame. Just like we set intentions about how we want to show up, we can also create intentions. We can create an emotional frame for how we want to view and perceive and react and feel in future scenarios. So before going into a difficult conversation, for example, you might be nervous, you might be fearful, and these emotions of fight or flight and stress may be getting fired up, getting you to take action without thinking. But we can set an intention for the emotions we want to navigate. So before going into that conversation, we might set the emotional frame of, I'm going to be helpful. I'm going to be understanding. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be a good listener. But it could be the opposite as well. It could be, I'm going to be firm. I will be resolved. Setting that emotional frame, it's like it's priming your brain to think a certain way. It's like setting up a filter through which you can experience that next scenario or conversation. Now, create a positive frame. Set an intention for how you want to show up. Choose how you want to react, should things go sideways, and you're going to be all right. When we do this well, we can better move into the next step, which is behavioral regulation. Now, behavioral regulation is all about choosing our actions. Now, choosing our actions can be divided into a couple of categories. There's task regulation, and then there's trait regulation. Let's talk about task regulation first. As we move through our day, we will be tempted to multitask, shifting our focus, getting distracted, task switching. Multitasking is the fastest way to do everything less well when compared to monotasking or focusing. So with behavior regulation, we can better avoid distractions. We can better maintain our focus and execute those tasks that are aligned with what we're trying to accomplish. But to do this, we need clarity. Like, what do you want? What do I want? Why am I sitting down at this computer and with the camera in front of me to create this podcast, to create this video? Well, my goal is to capture all of this and then put this on, online, whether it's on YouTube for the video or on my podcast for the audio. If I just sat down and I didn't have a goal or clarity of what I wanted the outcome to be, right? Completed video, then I could sit here and I could easily get distracted because, again, there's no purpose. There's no necessary alignment of my actions. We have to have clarity. Ask yourself what you want. Now, if this is too difficult to answer, you can ask yourself a different question. What don't you want? Sometimes this is a much easier question to ask. What don't you want? What life are you trying to avoid? What outcomes are you trying to avoid? What are you working to not see? This is going to be just as powerful as those questions of what do I want? What am I working toward? Who do I want to become? When we have clarity on our goals, we can better prioritize what we should and should not be doing with our time. Now, one more thing. Once you have clarity on your goals and you know what you need to do, put them in your calendar. Put your tasks in your calendar. Like, I don't know, if you're anything like me, like I live off of my calendar. And I go through my calendar and I look, okay, like if I ever have free time, like that is the worst time. Like that's the worst habit because it's like an empty closet, that empty space is going to find a way to fill itself. And on your calendar, if you have empty space, it's likely not going to be filled with something that is as productive as if you were intentional and clear about what you needed to do, what success looked like, and what outcome you were trying to achieve. So get it in your calendar. So that's task regulation. Now there's other things that we can talk about. Maybe we'll do this in the future around how do you set up your environment? How do you prime your brain for focus? Like how do you exercise and meditate accordingly to get the best brain effects? There's some really interesting performance research there, but this is just about, generally how do we regulate ourselves? So we got to know what we want and know what we need to do. That is task regulation. The second thing is actually trait regulation. So not only is it important we know what we are working on, but we should also know, how do we want to do it? How do we want to show up in the moment while we need to do that thing? As a task, I need to read, I need to write, I need to create a podcast or a video, but how do I want to do it? Do I want to be disciplined? Do I want to be creative? What kind of personality trait do I want to bring to the table while I'm executing that task? That is behavior. If I'm bringing a disciplined version of myself, that is a behavioral regulatory approach. So part of being clear on what we want and what tasks we are trying to achieve, this is where clarity on who we want to become is important as well. So are you striving to be more disciplined? Are you striving to stick to your exercise routine and land your diet? Are you striving to be more stoic or vulnerable or calm or patient, etc., etc.? You get the point. Now, as I said earlier, if you were looking to achieve goals in your life and you haven't achieved them already, that means that you are not the person who gets those kinds of goals, who has those kinds of outcomes. So back in the day when I really sucked as a leader, I had no idea how to address conflict. I had no idea how to talk to angry customers or angry employees or anybody who was disgruntled. And so I avoided conversations, or I kind of, I hid from them. Obviously, nothing good came from that. But to get different results, I had to be a different person. I had to show up as someone who was less reactive, a better listener, more of a coach, more patient, understanding. And sometimes I had to be more resolved, more firm with expectations. But I wasn't those things beforehand. So my conversations were terrible. To get different goals or to get different outcomes, I had to be a different person. I had to show up with different traits. So what are the traits that you need to demonstrate or that you need to develop in order to be aligned with that future ideal state of you, with who you want to become? And then what do we do in order to start practicing those traits? What I like to do is incantations. These are like affirmations. I don't really like the affirmation word just because it is affiliated or associated kind of with the kind of new age woo-woo stuff, which I'm not knocking it, but there is ascribed to affirmations a certain type of magic. And this is not magic. This is science. This is habit building is really all it is. An incantation is when I tell myself something that I want to believe is true. And through that habitual pattern of telling myself, of incanting what I am, what I want to be, I create a new pattern of self-talk. For example, if I go up because I need to speak in front of a group of people, my natural default voice is going to be, oh my God, they're going to judge me. What if I choke? That fear voice, that is just a habit. It's all it is. If I want to show up as confident and clear while speaking on stage, then, I can do so. One thing that will help though, is if I tell myself, I am a confident speaker. I am a confident speaker. Especially if I tell myself that, and I interrupt that pattern of feeling nervous and I pause and I go, no, I am a confident speaker and I embody that confidence. All I'm doing is I'm rewiring my brain so that when I feel uncomfortable about going to talk in front of a bunch of people, instead of that fear voice, that internal critic saying, oh, you suck, you're going to be judged, that other voice pops in and says, you are a confident speaker. There's no magic. It's science. It's repetition. So what are the incantations that you would like? For me, it's I am disciplined. I am focused. I am magnetic. I am creative. I could come up with a whole bunch of things that I want to be and that I want to rewire. But the point is speak positively to yourself. Rewire that self-talk so that you talk to yourself more positively in the way that you want to be. Task regulation is all about controlling what we do. Trait regulation is about controlling who we are when we show up to do those things. So let's wrap this up here. Our emotions, again, you'll hear me say this all the time, our emotions drive us to act without rational thought. That leads to dysregulation. It leads us to operate our actions or our life on a whim of how we're feeling. And yes, it can be a whim. Instead, how do we regulate ourselves so that in spite of how we're feeling, we can push past fear or discomfort and act in ways that is aligned with our goals and who we want to be? The first thing we need to do is cognitive regulation, control our thoughts, influence our thoughts. And we can do so through setting an intention. Get clarity on what you want. Create that list of things that you want to do in the morning. Or in the morning, create the list of the things you want to do. When you transition from one thing to a next, clear those past thoughts and think about how you want to show up to that next event. And then set a positive intention as well. That'll help us take care of our mind. Then we can leverage that mind control to control our feelings. When we control our feelings, we can create space between when something happens and when we choose to react, or what our actions are. We can also set an emotional frame for how we intend to perceive and react to whatever comes next. After that, we can leverage both of those for behavioral regulation. It comes down to our, doing what tasks are necessary because we have clarity on what we need to do, and also controlling and regulating how we show up, who we are when we show up to those scenarios. So consider what you want. Create clarity on what you want the tasks you need to do and who you want to be when you show up. Create some incantations as well and get after it, everybody. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you keep crushing it. And until next time.